You've been at the Africa Climate Summit. Talk me through what happened last week.
Good question. It was the Africa Climate Summit and the Africa Climate Week happening concurrently in the same location, but with different objectives. So the Africa Climate Summit is where more of the high-level dialogue was happening, and then the Africa Climate Week is where there were more side events. So for different organizations and people who wanted to showcase the work that they're doing, and just that diversity that couldn't fit into the Climate Summit was at the Climate Week.
Interesting. You said it was the first ever climate summit, Africa.
Yes, exactly. The first ever Africa Climate Summit. So that was very exciting to see the African perspective actually, from the African people themselves, because there's a lot of talk from different players, but actually getting it from the actual organizations, the actual stakeholders that are involved. I think that was really interesting to see play out last week. And of course, it did have its challenges here and there. But I think, it's very important to have such opportunities for certain regions to air out what, the issues are in regards to climate change and how it is affecting them and what solutions they actually do have. Because you notice a lot of the solutions across regions are very contextual. And that's something that maybe a lot of people don't really think about because it's affecting people, climate change is affecting people differently. It might look the same, but it has very many different undercurrents. And so it's climate change, and then we have issues of climate justice, and then we have issues of what type of solutions make sense for this region, and then we have the geopolitical issues. So it's very contextual, and I think that was very important for the continent to actually have.
Amazing. So you work with WILDLABS as our East Africa coordinator. So our focus is on conservation tech. So why were you at a climate summit this week?
Very good question. First, we're very lucky enough to get invited to make a presentation at the Africa Climate Summit, the First Lady's Pavilion on our Women in Conservation Tech program, which is currently ongoing. We have our second cohort in Tanzania right now. And so I think personally, beyond the presentation, of course, that we were giving, I think as a person in conservation tech, I really wanted to see the perspective outside of our community, because we usually always have the perspective of how things are running within. And we think the things that we think are common knowledge are common knowledge to, most people because we're within the community itself. But the perspective of being outside, I think, was so important, and seeing how people think of conservation tech. Do people know what conservation tech is? How do they see themselves engaging with it? And just looking at it from an outsider's perspective. I think that was something that was, I think, the biggest takeaway from all this, and seeing how does conservation tech fit in to the wider climate change conversation. And I think it's still a new space for a lot of people who are in the environment and climate space, which was very interesting for me to discover, because I thought, conservation tech, everyone knows this. But when I started mentioning it, I think it felt like such a big word, and people are like, "Oh, that sounds cool. What is that?" And some people are like, "I think I know what that is, but I might not be sure. So I'm just going to ask you to just define it again." But I noticed that as I gave examples, and especially even during the presentation, as I gave people examples and let them know, hey, this is the tech that's being used, or also just giving them an example of the applicability within even the East African region, people said, oh, wow, I know that tech. We also use that tech in maybe agri-tech or clean tech. And so the examples made people start,
building bridges,
understanding.
Right?
Exactly. But for me, it's just that outsider perspective. And I think in every space that people are in, they need that outsider perspective, because then you start understanding, oh, wow, this is how people who are outside viewers, and this is what people know about us, and this is maybe what we need to communicate more on so that people can actually engage us better. So I think for me that was the biggest highlight.
That's super interesting, because there's a similar experience we had at ICCB as well, International Congress for Conservation Biology, which we were at a few weeks ago. And it's funny because that's conservationists, and I have always viewed WILDLABS and conservation tech as such a broad church. For me, climate change is an integral part of the sort of challenges that we're trying to tackle. So it's interesting who's able to identify themselves as part of our community versus who we see as part of our community. And I think there's really definitely something there about how we talk about conservation tech and actually maybe that term's not helpful, and talking about those specific examples. Are you using camera traps? Are you using remote sensing data? Are you like
That's it.
dealing with human wildlife conflict or whatever it is? Our communities that help you, right? And you're a part of it, and kind of broadening that sort of identity and who self-identifies as part of the community that we're there to serve, right? You're completely right with like grounding it in examples as being the critical way of like building bridges and finding that common ground.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the space where I noticed that our annual Tech for Wildlife Photo Challenge, like it's so important. It's so important to showcase, hey, this is the tech we're using and this is the conservation related challenge we're solving. And having it as a hashtag and having it even in social media platforms, I think, because a lot of people after I gave the presentation, they started going to, look at our social media platforms and using the hashtag, and they're like, oh, wow, there's thousands of examples out here and it's
This
so
community
easy to
exists.
understand them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Totally.
So I really think that our photo challenge is really important, and I think we should have it every year, to be honest.
We do have it every year. What are you talking about?
Like it should never stop. It should never we have it every year.
Oh, right. So
it is annual, but like English, I think
8 years in a row, Esther.
We should always have it should never end is the statement, I think.
Yeah.
It should never end. It should be like a continuous part of what we do.
So getting back to Africa Climate Summit and Africa Climate Week, I love the framework, and I'm going to shamelessly steal this from someone at ICCB, Chris Wilcox, thank you very much, who talked about coming to the conference with 3 goals, which was to learn about something interesting that he didn't know about before, to meet someone interesting, and to leave with something he wants to go find out more about. So I want to ask those questions of you. I just think it's a more interesting debrief than, hey, I went and did this and I met this person and then I did this. So what I'd love for you to tell me is, okay, what's the thing that you took away, the most interesting theme or thing you learned from the summit?
Very good questions. I think I'll start with the most interesting person that I met.
Okay, you're tackling all 3 at once. Okay, that's totally fine. Who's the most interesting person?
I'd have to go with the Safaricom Sustainability Environment Lead, Owen. And I think, for me personally as a Kenyan, I think Safaricom's always been that company that we always look up to in terms of being like a tech company that has a for good purpose. They they're very focused on that. And
wait, if you're Kenyan or in the East Africa community, you're probably familiar with Safaricom, but for anyone else who might be listening, do you want to tell us, what do they do?
So Safaricom is a telecommunication company. It falls under Vodafone. So a lot of people would know Vodafone. So Safaricom falls under Vodafone, and they are the largest telecommunication company across East and Central Africa. And they don't just do telecommunication, they do mobile money. I'm sure you've heard of M-Pesa, which is like this mobile money sensation that's transformed how we engage with money across the continent. But they also are known for a lot of their sustainability projects, socioeconomic, and now they're getting more into environmental projects, which I found very interesting. And they have a really cool project called IoT in the Wild. It's mitigating human-wildlife conflict, and they're currently testing it out and hoping to deploy it in Kenya soon.
Okay. Any species?
So for me,
IoT in the wild.
They're focusing specifically on the big 5, of course, which is
rhinos, elephants,
common across the East Africa, exactly, common within the East African region, and of course, common in human-wildlife conflict. So that is an organization that I think is perfect when you're talking about the integration or this collaboration between tech and conservation, being able to actually merge the two, and being so focused on tech for good and being within this region and trying to delve into the environment space. So meeting Owen was really great, and him sharing more about their deep interest in actually getting into conservation tech, and not from the perspective of just this CSR. A lot of companies have the perspective of, oh, we just want to do something good for our social responsibility and have it in the books, and that's it. But I think from hearing more about how he feels that he wants to structure that docket of his work, it feels like they want to actually have a real impact. They want to connect and partner with the right stakeholders to actually solve some of the conservation issues across this region using the right type of tech. And so, personally for me, that was very exciting to actually hear, and also know that he has a conservation background. And so it was like, oh wow, people out there are actually, this is happening. Conservation tech is actually happening at the corporate level and in multinational organizations, because he is a person with a conservation background working in a major tech company in a space that is focused on kind of bolstering up conservation tech. So that was very exciting to actually see and have that kind of a conversation. And that was the fun thing about the Africa Climate Summit, where you could meet with such people just by walking around or engaging people. I think on a normal day-to-day basis, it might be a bit more difficult to engage with, but there it was an open field and open dialogues, and people were more easy access to actually have such discussions.
That's my favorite thing about conferences, is having like a
Yeah,
critical mass of people that you like, oh, I've been meaning to talk to you for so long. I've like not seen you
exactly.
for 4 years. Like, let's have a conversation.
Hmm.
Let's have a couple of conversations because we'll see you over a couple of days. It's so, I
Uh-huh.
love the virtual aspect of our work and like the
Yeah.
accessibility and like inclusiveness that it enables. But I've always thought that the virtual connections enable the
Hmm.
magic to happen when you're in person. It kind of lays the
Absolutely.
groundwork to get there. And it's
Hmm.
just such a delight to be able to see people in person again. Yeah,
It is.
yes, I hear you.
On to your second question about the thing that I want to investigate more, having left. It was something that I knew about, but it wasn't such a key focus. And I think that is on climate financing. And the focus has always been on startups. So, you think about climate tech, clean tech, it's always been okay. We're focusing on innovation and startups, but I hadn't really thought about it in regards to how much financing the continent actually gets to mitigate some of the climate change impacts, and why they even have to get financing in the first place to mitigate such impacts, because they are a very low emitter of greenhouse gases. So how come they are actually dealing with climate related issues in a way that they actually shouldn't be, based on their contribution to the issue itself?
Mm,
So, like the Nairobi Declaration, and just even being a part of those discussions that were happening, and just listening to other people, whether they're in government, whether they're in NGOs, whether they have their own startups as well, or in academia, just listening to the discussions that they were having, and getting to understand, okay, there is a significant problem on the African continent in regards to financing. And if I remember, the percentage was that Africa only receives 12%
yeah.
of the financing they require to actually mitigate some of the climate related issues that they're currently facing. And they are facing significant climate related challenges that are as a result of what's happening in the global north. And so there's that uneven playing field. And I think that was the position of a lot of the heads of state and a lot of the NGOs that had come on board. I think maybe it touches with climate justice as well,
Mm,
but I didn't know it was so significant. I hadn't taken into context that it was actually, it's I think even a geopolitical issue to an extent. I thought it was always just venture capital for like startups to like, come up with cool, climate related innovations. But I didn't know that it was, we need them. We need the innovations. And so for me, it was stressing the importance of conservation tech as well, and how do we actually make sure that it continues being funded and financed, and people who have conservation tech solutions have access to the financial resources they need to scale up those innovations and get them being used in the conservancies that are facing certain challenges. Because I think it's getting it on the ground and getting it actually helping the problem that it was created to actually solve, and there's some funding and financing that's needed to actually get that on the ground. So like Sandra's story, I had done an interview with Sandra Marianne, who created Dovu Care,
mm,
and it's a human elephant mitigation sensor technology.
mm,
And one of the key concerns that she had was she couldn't get it to phase two because she lacked access to financing, that support to help her kind of further develop it so that she can actually start phasing it out in different conservancies, because she had actually tested it in some conservancies and it actually
yeah.
worked.
Yeah.
And for me, I think that reinforced the need of conservation tech because of the scale of the issues we're facing, which I didn't know what that fast. And then second is, how do we make sure that they are financed in the correct way and funded in the correct way? Because even a lot of financial institutions had a challenge with, how do we finance conservation tech solutions? They felt it was such a niche space
Yeah.
um, in comparison to agri-tech or clean tech. But there was a lot of interest, and and a lot of them noted that they are trying to wrap their heads around, how do we actually finance this? Because we want to finance it. That was the statement. We want to finance it, but how do we finance it? And I think for them it was, oh, we need to have discussions and partner with people in conservation tech. We need to have discussions with the people that we wish to actually finance, and so this has to be a collaboration and two-way street. We can't just craft financial models and we're not having discussions with people that we're actually trying to support. So
Yeah,
that for me was the key thing.
it's interesting. There's a lot in what you just said. I wonder if you
Hmm.
could, and bits that are just really sticky challenges and like things that we're hearing over and
Hmm.
over again. Like there is a lot of finance going into climate and carbon at the moment, and there are linkages to conservation tech, but maybe it goes back
Hmm.
to what we were talking about at the start, that like it's a false separation between climate and conservation tech. But like, what do you think
Hmm.
the pathway is of like, okay, if there's funding, it's funding is challenging, but funding's coming through. What's the linkage between the climate stuff and projects like Sandra's
Hmm.
project? Can you talk about that a little bit more?
That is a very complex
Yeah,
it's a very complex
it's not
it's
really
very
suited
complex,
for not suited for like what we were supposed to be a 5 minute debrief, but that's fine.
but it's very important. No, it's a very important question. And I actually was
Yeah,
really thinking about this the other day, and I also felt a bit neglected as somebody in conservation tech, in the sense that whenever environmental and climate discussions are being had, especially in regard to tech, I feel like conservation tech isn't in the discussion yet. And I feel like it needs to be there. It is a part of all those discussions if you
yeah,
think about it, because if you think about the example, so climate related issues, right? We have extreme weather events. Extreme weather events lead to habitat loss,
yeah,
or rising water levels, and
yeah.
then that puts wildlife and biodiversity at risk. For example, I had posted this on WildLabs recently about the story at Lake Baringo. The
Mm,
lake rising because, of course, of extreme weather changes, and then we have the endangered giraffe in that region being put under risk, and we had conservancies that had to come in and rehome them to a safer ground. And if technology like satellite and earth observation tech hadn't noticed that that lake level was going to rise rapidly, they wouldn't be able to alert conservancies to move the giraffe to safer ground.
mm,
Same thing for human wildlife conflict. When the extreme weather events, we have habitat loss, and wildlife is moving closer to human habitats like farmlands to get access to resources, and then you have that clash. But if you have tech that can actually help solve that, so it's climate related issues lead to conservation related issues. It's the same
and
coin,
yeah,
intertwined. It's
they're
the same
intertwined. Yes.
thing. But most people hear conservation tech and they think, oh, okay, with this
Oh, it's over
wildlife.
here, like camera trams. Nice.
Exactly.
And do you think it's
And
so?
I
Do you
really
think it's
think that
purely a branding issue or a storytelling issue? Then,
I I want to say that, but we're not at fault. Like I feel I feel like a
yeah.
lot of times, like, people might want to throw it back and say, oh, I might not know about conservation tech because I haven't seen anything about conservation tech. But I feel like if we're being honest, if you are in the climate space and you are looking at all potential solutions, here is Wild Labs, which is an amazing and extremely vibrant platform that is very vocal on the social platforms about the tech that people are using. And
Mm,
you can't ignore that. So I feel maybe I I don't want to use the word maybe a level of ignorance. I don't want to say that, but maybe people are a bit ignorant
mm,
to what is happening, because the examples are there. People can see the examples and they can see the linkage between how a climate related issue can affect even wildfires. And we've been noticing a lot of wildfires
mm,
happening, and we've seen how they're affecting wildlife in a
yeah.
very significant way. And you would need conservation tech to help solve that, as you're having climate tech solving the more overarching issue.
Yeah.
So I feel it's imperative for us to maybe scream a bit louder, and get people seeing what we're doing just a bit more. I feel like we have been doing that, but maybe here's where the collaborations come in. Maybe it's linking up with also climate tech and also saying, hey, this is how these two things are one and the same thing, in regards to you're
Mm.
solving the bigger issue, but then that issue is also causing this other issue, and then we're solving for that issue. So it's
I think,
having those cross-sectional
yeah.
discussions, I think.
But I also think one of the things that just kind of came clear in this conversation is that conservation tech is not the end point. Conservation tech is
That's
the
true.
tool, the stepping stone that enables the end result, right? Which is the
That's it. Yeah.
supporting habitat, like being able to get data to make better decisions, whatever it
Hmm.
is. The path that seems clear to me is, or the chain is financing, investment, whatever mechanism it is,
Hmm.
conservation tech as a critical tool that needs innovation to be able to support greater impact on the ground. And
Yes.
all of those three things needing to be better articulated, linked up, because the financing is going to the end result, right? And we need to be
Yeah.
better at linking the conservation tech, because the point for us is not to get everyone using technology, it's to capture the funding and the financing to get access, to take tools to scale, right? Instead of like this one project, this one conservancy having this bespoke tool, using it to, okay, here is a shared need across this region or across conservation. Can we develop a tool that serves everyone so that we're all...
That's it.
Yes, exactly. And it's interesting. I think there's further conversations to be had. Then we get to the point of like scaling is hard in conservation. Like it's really hard.
It is.
Tech tools is hard and doesn't give the same, like if you're a venture capital like investment,
the return on investment
doesn't give the same returns, right? And so I wonder if there's, hearing what's happening in the climate world, of like how they're managing that sort of issue would help us as well. I don't know. I think there's a further conversation to have there. But interesting insights.
There is.
Okay, third part of that question. What's the one thing you learned? And I guess this is my final question as well. Like, what do you think is next? Where is this leading?
I think for me, the first thing that I learned was that conservation tech needs to be a key thematic area under all climate discussions. It needs to be. It has to be. And I feel that going forward, like even as of course there's the New York Climate Summit, and of course it'll be having the climate summits are happening, regionally leading up to COP in November. I think it's becoming more apparent to me that we need to push for more conservation tech dialogue, more conservation tech events, more conservation tech engagements at those high level events, because that's when it gets the notice that it needs. And that's when people start looking at those intersections of, oh, here's climate tech, it fits, here's the financing that we can start thinking of crafting. And because it even those events draw the right people, the decision makers, the people who have the capacity to make impact in certain spaces and kind of get the ball rolling on all the stuff that we just discussed. So I think it's so important for us as the conservation tech community to be a bit more aggressive in wanting space and visibility and wanting to actually engage in these discussions with the wider climate community and the wider environment community, because I think conservation tech has so much potential to solve so many issues that people aren't able to connect immediately. Because even if it's climate tech, it may solve for this one issue, but then it leaves out the issue that's happening after that. And maybe they don't know, hey, we can actually just integrate all this together, collaborate together, and solve the main issue and all the other issues that are being caused because of this one issue. So I think it's important for us to make way for conservation tech events within those large events and even our own events. And I feel like we should even have our own conference and our own major high level
we do know event. That's under development, right?
We really need to, because I feel like a lot of people would attend because of the curiosity. And the thing I notice is people are curious and people are interested. It's just that it's not an immediate thing that they've come into contact with.
But I think it's not that they haven't come into contact with it. That's the first step. The second step is finding like useful pathways,
the linkage,
getting people involved, whether it's at the level of like a big international tech company or an individual engineer or a venture cap, like all of the range of people coming in from other sectors. How do we build effective pathways for engagement at all those levels? And that's really hard. And we've been thinking about that.
It is
working on different ways for years, but it's still finding ways to matchmake and to build the team and broaden who's part of the conservation tech world. An ongoing challenge, I think.
But I 100%, am for conservation technologists speaking at events and holding side events, because it would have been amazing to see a lot of conservation tech showcased at the Africa Climate Week, the side events. I think people would have loved it. I think it would have been exciting. People would just be like, oh, wow, this is really cool. A lot of the tech I saw there that was being showcased was, of course, agri-tech. Clean tech. And so, it would be really amazing. So I think I'd just love to encourage all the WILDLABS members, like if there's an event that is in your area that is maybe a climate related or environment related event, go for it. Showcase the conservation tech maybe that you're developing, you're using. Let people know, hey, there's a community called WILDLABS that actually has all this amazing resources and people and tools and discussions. And if you feel like you'd love to learn more or partner or collaborate with people or share knowledge and create those linkages that you just talked about, stuff like, hey, join WILDLABS. Everyone who is in conservation tech has the role of being an ambassador for conservation tech at this point. And I think, WildLabs is the best platform and the best resource to share with people as a starting point to, hey, you're interested in conservation tech, here's WildLabs. I think it would be a great starting point to integrate you into what conservation tech is and connect you with the right people.
Amazing call to action. I think there's also an added layer of there's the going out and being ambassadors, but also using like our events calendar and like if you're going, finding
Yes,
other Wild Labs people and like forming a movement and
I'm,
leveraging
I'm for
each
that.
other, right? And
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
our connections and who we are as a community
Yeah,
and trying to use these events to meet each other as well. So
absolutely.
what a great call to action to end on. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to leave everyone else with after this?
I think it's that mean when all, you're an ambassador for conservation tech, go out there, let people know about Wild Labs, share even the events that you've attended and let us know, hey, I attended this climate event, I gave this talk on conservation tech. Let us know in the discussions, in the articles, post stuff, let us know so that we can develop our community in a way that we can encourage more of the climate related, environment related, and the financial stakeholders to be interested in actually, connect with us and solve a lot of the challenges that are facing our planet. So go out there, conservation tech ambassadors and wildlife promoters as well. So yes, that is what I'd love to leave people with.
Oh, wonderful, Esther. That's not how I expected us to end, but what a great call to action. Okay,
Mm,
thanks everyone for listening. We'll catch you off on our next debrief. See you on Wireless.
amazing.
Bye.